My mother offered me money to forgive my brother for getting my fiancée pregnant 2 months before our wedding, but I took the money and let karma take care of the rest. My mother offered me money. A lot of money. To pretend nothing happened and embrace the man who destroyed my life. I took the money. But the hug? I let karma handle that one. And what he did next, no one could have seen coming. I never imagined my own mother would try to convince me to forgive my brother after everything he did. When she offered me something I never expected, I realized she didn't understand anything about what I was feeling. What did I do with that offer? It wasn't what she had hoped for. 3 years ago, I was engaged to a woman I'll call Lila. Back then, I truly believed she was the person I would marry. Lila and I had been together for almost 5 years, and our relationship seemed solid. We were both lawyers, which meant we had demanding and fast-paced lives, but we always made time for each other. The year I proposed to Lila should have been the happiest of our lives, but something unexpected happened. She lost her job. The dismissal came after it was discovered she had violated some company rules. I won't go into specific details because it's personal, but I can say the company let her go quite abruptly. If you've ever met someone who is a perfectionist and a workaholic, you'll understand how a loss like that can shake them to their core. For Lila, work wasn't just a job, it was part of her identity, her pride, and her purpose. Losing it so suddenly left her completely lost. Lila immediately started looking for another job, sending her resume to countless firms and companies. Unfortunately, her experience was very specialized, and opportunities weren't easy to come by, especially considering the circumstances of her dismissal. Months passed, and she still hadn't landed a new position. During all that time, I tried to be as supportive as possible. I told her she didn't need to worry about finances. After all, we were engaged, and I saw it as my responsibility to take care of her during this difficult phase. Knowing Lila had a tendency to stress and worry excessively, I encouraged her to relax and not let the situation consume her. To my surprise, she took my advice, or at least tried to. With her free time, Lila decided to pursue something that had always been a dream of hers, learning landscaping. She enrolled in a local course and started dedicating her spare hours to this new hobby. Coincidentally, it was the same course my brother, Mason, was taking. Let me tell you a bit about Mason. He's the complete opposite of me. While I've always been the responsible one, focused on studies and career, Mason was the laid-back, known womanizer. He never took anything seriously and rarely stayed with one girl for long. Lila met Mason early in our relationship and knew the kind of person he was. So when she started attending the same landscaping course as him, I thought it was just a coincidence. But looking back, that's where things started to change. In the weeks that followed, the two of them became surprisingly close. At first, I didn't think much of it. Mason sometimes offered to drive her to class, which seemed kind, though unusual. Lila would come home excited, telling stories about what they'd done in class or showing photos of the projects they were working on. Over time, their interactions extended beyond landscaping. They started going out on weekends, visiting art museums or trying new restaurants, activities I usually did with Lila. Gradually, I noticed changes in her behavior. She was spending much more time with Mason than I was comfortable with and began canceling our date nights to go out with him. I'm not the type to let things build up. So one night, I confronted her directly. I asked if there was anything going on between her and Mason. Lila was shocked and even offended by the question. She categorically denied anything inappropriate was happening and insisted their relationship was purely platonic. She said spending time with him was fun and lighthearted, comparing him to a younger brother. For a moment, I felt guilty for doubting her. But deep down, her explanations didn't reassure me. Things came to a head just 2 months before our wedding. At that point, I was working tirelessly, shouldering the entire financial burden to make sure everything was in order. Ever since Lila lost her job, I took on the entire financial responsibility for our home and all the wedding expenses. She still hadn't found a new job, and although she used some of her savings for personal expenses or emergencies, I shouldered the bulk of the burden. Between paying for everything and the stress of wedding planning, my hours at the office became longer and more exhausting. I wasn't as present as I should have been, and looking back, perhaps that gave Lila and Mason the opportunity to grow so close. One night, I came home early from a business trip. I was excited to surprise Lila and spend some time with her. As I pulled into the driveway, I immediately noticed my brother's car parked there. Normally, I wouldn't have thought much of it. Mason had a habit of showing up unannounced. But this time was different. It was past 9 p.m., and seeing his car there, so late, put me on high alert. When I walked in, the living room was empty, but the TV was on. My eyes soon fixed on the beer cans scattered on the floor, and then on something unmistakable, Lila's underwear carelessly tossed among them. In that instant, I knew exactly what I was about to discover. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, but another part, the one that needed irrefutable proof, propelled me forward. I had to see it with my own eyes. I walked slowly until I stopped at the bedroom door. There they were, Lila and Mason, entangled in the most intimate way imaginable. They were so absorbed in each other they didn't even notice my presence. I'm normally a calm and collected person, but this was the ultimate betrayal. Without saying a word, I stepped into the room. I walked over to the bed, grabbed Mason by the back of his neck, and pulled his face away from Lila. The shock on his expression was almost satisfying. He turned to look at me, and his face went from confusion to terror in seconds. I didn't even glance at Lila. Mason started babbling apologies, but his words meant nothing to me in that moment. I punched him straight in the nose. The sound of bone breaking brought a dark satisfaction as blood started to pour. He screamed in pain, but I wasn't done. I kept hitting him, each punch harder than the last. Once Mason was on the floor, bloodied and begging me to stop, I turned my attention to Lila. She was sitting on the bed, trembling and crying. I looked directly into her eyes and told her she had 10 minutes to get out of my house. I warned her that if she didn't, I wouldn't hesitate to leave her in the same bloody state as my brother. She began begging for forgiveness, saying she could explain and asking for another chance to fix things. But I wasn't interested in her excuses. I looked at my watch and said coldly, "You have 9 minutes." The tone of my voice and my look must have convinced her I wasn't joking. She scrambled out of bed, dressing with shaky hands as tears streamed down her face. She grabbed a suitcase from the closet and started packing what she could. When she was done, she dragged the suitcase downstairs and turned to me one last time. Her voice was broken as she begged me to listen, claiming she loved me and deserved a chance to explain. Without a word, I took the engagement ring off her finger and pushed her toward the door. She tried to resist, begging me to reconsider, but I'd had enough. I opened the door and shoved her out. She fell onto the porch, still crying and screaming for forgiveness. Without looking back, I slammed the door in her face. Mason was still bloodied from the fight. Even though I was still boiling with rage, I didn't want to be responsible for something worse. I called my parents and told them everything that had happened. My father was furious with Mason, while my mother was in shock, but they both said they would come over immediately. When they arrived, my mother, being a nurse, tended to Mason's injuries. She cleaned and bandaged his wounds, which thankfully were superficial. Meanwhile, my father took me out to the backyard, away from Mason. He could see my hands were still shaking with anger and that I was holding myself back from exploding. Later, Mason came out to the backyard with my mother. His face was covered in bruises, his nose bandaged, and there were still bloodstains on his shirt. He apologized for betraying me, saying he never meant for things to go this far. But then he dropped the bomb. He said he was in love with Lila. Finally, I turned to look at him, furious. He went on explaining how he believed Lila felt the same way about him. He claimed that was the first time they had slept together, as if that made it all better. He then took out his phone and showed me their messages, conversations full of flirting, secrets, and confessions from Lila about how unhappy she was in our relationship. As I read those messages, my anger began to boil over again. Mason kept talking, saying he was sorry for betraying me, but insisted he had never felt like this about anyone before. My father, who had been listening in silence, finally lost his patience and told Mason he should consider himself lucky he hadn't received an even worse beating from me. My mother, on the other hand, reacted differently. Mason had always been her favorite, and you could see she was struggling with the situation. She started saying that regardless of what I decided to do about Lila, I needed to forgive my brother. She said he seemed genuinely remorseful and that brothers shouldn't fight over a woman. She even offered me money to compensate for the wedding expenses. When I said I would take the check but wouldn't forgive Mason, she withdrew the offer. I cut my mother off and told my parents I wasn't in the mood for lectures or advice. All I wanted at that moment was for them to take Mason and leave. I couldn't stand to look at him any longer. My father nodded, understanding I needed space, and helped Mason into the car. My mother hesitated, clearly wanting to stay and mediate, but ended up following them. In the weeks that followed, I was still dealing with the fallout. Lila had been sending me relentless messages, begging for forgiveness and trying to explain, but her explanations always revolved around the same tired excuses, very similar to what Mason had already told me. She claimed she and Mason never intended to hurt me. I basically ignored all the messages for an entire week. Then, out of the blue, I got a call from Mason. He informed me that he and Lila had just found out she was pregnant and that the baby was his. He told me that since she was expecting his child, he wanted to marry her and was asking for my blessing, which I didn't give. My mother's reaction only made things worse. She was already trying to act as a mediator between Mason and me, but now she seemed to see Lila's pregnancy as some kind of divine intervention. She told me it was God's plan for Lila to get pregnant this way, and that perhaps Mason and Lila were always meant to be together. It was as if she was trying to justify the unimaginable, excusing what they had done because it fit into her new fantasy of becoming a grandmother. I told my mother right then that I knew exactly what she was doing, and that if she chose to side with Mason and Lila, our relationship would be over. I wasn't joking. My brother's betrayal was bad enough, but having my own mother defend him was something I could not accept. My father tried to stay neutral, perhaps thinking it would help diffuse the tension. Either way, my mother offered Lila financial support, assuring her and the baby would be taken care of. But, of course, there was a condition. My mother insisted that she and Mason must get married. After all, that's what Mason wanted too. Mom was relentless in pushing for this outcome, refusing to even entertain the idea of her grandchild being born out of wedlock. When I found out Mason and Lila were actually going through with the wedding and started sending out invitations to our relatives, I felt furious and humiliated. Without further discussion, I kept my word and cut my mother and my brother out of my life. My mother, however, doesn't give up easily. For weeks after the break, she called me non-stop, left voicemails, and even showed up uninvited at my door, trying to guilt-trip me into reconciling. It was suffocating. That's when I realized the only way to escape her would be to leave town for good. It's been 3 years since they destroyed my life and I moved to a new city, cutting ties with almost everyone in my family except for my father. He respected my decision to move and understood why I needed the distance, though he was sad I wouldn't be visiting anymore. During these 3 years, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I didn't share my new number with anyone except my father. I made new friends, found a new sense of normalcy, and worked hard to leave the past behind. So imagine my surprise yesterday when I found Lila ringing my doorbell. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her at first. Lila looked nothing like the woman I once loved. It seemed as if she had been ill or had suffered greatly during this time. She was standing there, holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years old. The girl had Mason's distinct features, which left no doubt about who her father was. I wondered why she was here, how she found me, what she wanted. Finally, I broke the silence. "Lila, what are you doing here?" She started crying as she asked if she could come in, saying she had something important to discuss with me. My first instinct was to say no, to send her away, but then I looked at the little girl beside her, looking at me with those innocent eyes. I couldn't be rude in front of her, so I stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. I showed them to the sofa and offered water. After they settled, I sat across from them and asked, "What are you doing here?" I already knew she couldn't have found me on her own. I hadn't given my address to anyone except my father, and I trusted he would keep it secret unless something truly important came up. So, what was so important that he would give away my location? Instead of answering immediately, Lila reached into her bag, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to me without a word. I opened it immediately and recognized my mother's handwriting. My mother had written directly that it was my responsibility to fix the disaster Mason had created. She explained how Lila and Jesse were struggling, how Mason had abandoned them, and how, being Mason's brother and Jesse's uncle, I should help them because Lila was almost my wife and the child was my niece. I looked at Lila, confused and angry. "What does this mean?" I asked. That's when Lila broke down and started telling me the whole story. According to her, Mason had always been unfaithful in the marriage, from the very beginning, even after Lila gave birth to Jesse. My brother had continued having intermittent flings the entire time they were together. For her part, Lila had tried to make things work, hoping they would improve over time, even if just for Jesse's sake. But 3 months ago, Mason packed his things and left without explanation, without a note, without a warning. He simply vanished. Since then, Lila had been alone, without a job, without savings, without a home. She and Mason had lived in a rented house, and without him, she could no longer afford it. My mother, feeling some sort of obligation to Jesse, had given Lila money to help, but now, with Mason essentially gone for good, my mother had decided she no longer wanted to be responsible for Lila and her daughter. Lila went on to say that my mother wanted me to take care of her and Jesse, since they had nowhere else to go and no one else to turn to. I felt completely disgusted by what she was asking and by the ridiculous notion that both she and my mother expected me to help. My mother had not only sided with Mason during the initial betrayal, but was now trying to dump the consequences of their actions onto me. My mother's relentless favoritism toward Mason was rearing its head again, as always. I immediately told Lila, very bluntly and in front of her daughter, that she had no right to expect help from me. She was not my daughter. She was no longer my fiancée, and clearly, this was not my responsibility. While I felt bad Mason had abandoned her, she should have seen this coming. After all, he is not a trustworthy or responsible person. I wasn't going to be manipulated into helping. Then I asked Lila to leave. She started crying, saying she had nowhere to go, no money, and that what little she had left was spent on gas to get to me. I ended up giving her enough to fill her tank before asking her to leave. And that's my story with my mother and her favoritism. I recently discovered this subreddit about parents who favor one child, and thought it was interesting to share my story. Update 1, I want to clarify a few things. My mother's behavior in this situation also leaves me completely baffled. The fact that she's trying to guilt-trip me into helping Lila and her daughter, after everything that happened, seems incredibly selfish to me. I understand she might feel obligated because of her granddaughter, but she shouldn't expect me to clean up the mess her son left behind, especially after everything that happened when I was the one who was betrayed. If my mother wants to have a favorite child, she can, but she also needs to take responsibility for him. I agree with some of the comments saying my father also betrayed me. Instead of offering me the support I needed after everything, he took a neutral stance. While he reprimanded my brother back then, he never truly stood by my side and didn't challenge my mother's manipulative behavior. He played a part in this betrayal too, and I plan to have a conversation with him soon. It's true Mason left Lila, but that doesn't automatically put the responsibility on me to take care of her. She made her choices, and while I may feel some sympathy for her situation, I owe her nothing. The fact that she showed up at my door with nothing but a sad story and a child only highlights her desperation. I didn't reject her out of spite, I simply made it clear it's not my responsibility to fix what Mason broke. I'm not obligated to care for her just because she's in a tough spot now. That child is definitely not mine. Lila and I had already broken up weeks before she got pregnant, and when we ended it, we hadn't been intimate in a long time. The timeline is clear, and there is absolutely no chance I'm the father. There's no need for a paternity test or anything like that. Plus, Jessie has all of Mason's features, her face, eyes, smile. It's like looking at Mason as a child. I have no doubt Mason is the father. I don't need a paternity test because the resemblance is unmistakable. The child is, without a shadow of a doubt, Mason's daughter, and I won't let myself get dragged into more drama. No, I do not want to adopt my niece. I can't believe some of you are suggesting that. Regardless of Lila's financial or emotional situation, she is the mother, and it is her responsibility. I don't understand why she never worked after getting married or why she didn't save. Mason is the father, so even if they are separated, both Lila and Mason must take responsibility for caring for Jessie. Mason has no choice but to pay child support. Update 2. I spoke to my parents about everything. I already knew my father had given my address to Lila, but I wanted to hear it directly from him. I called him and asked, point blank, why he agreed to share my location with her after I had repeatedly asked him not to. I also asked what he expected me to do for Lila and her daughter after all these years. My father was silent for a moment, clearly uncomfortable, then sighed deeply and apologized. I'm sorry, son, truly, he said. We did everything we could to help Lila, but with Mason gone for so long, we could only do so much. Your mother begged me to give her your address. She said maybe if you saw her after all this time, you'd want to help in some way, since she has nowhere else to go. I felt my frustration rising and asked, why would you think I'd want to help someone like her? She betrayed me with Mason, she hurt me, and now you want me to help her? My father told me he understood my anger. He explained that neither he nor my mother wanted things to end up this way, but that Lila and Jessie were part of the family now. He thought I was their only option. He apologized again, but I didn't listen. I told him our relationship was over. I trusted he would be different from my mother, but I discovered they were all the same, backstabbing traitors. Did they really think I would forget the past, accept Lila and my brother's daughter into my life, and start taking care of them? Wow, it's a hard blow to realize my parents truly didn't care about me. I told my father, firmly and without hesitation, to lose my number and forget I ever existed for him. Since he knew my address, I warned him that if he or my mother showed up at my house, I would call the police. My father tried to apologize again, begging me to listen, but I was no longer interested. Don't call me again, I said. Just don't. You made your choices, and I'm making mine. If he expected me to say anything more, I'm sorry for him. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked his number. What my father did is unforgivable, and there is no going back. Update 3. It's been almost a month since my last update. I finally managed to locate Mason with the help of one of my friends. It turns out Lila was right. Mason has been living with his latest fling in a nearby city, pretending he has no responsibilities, as if he has no family. It doesn't surprise me, he's always been like that. I can't believe this is the same guy who, 3 years ago, told me with a serious expression that he was in love with Lila. The same guy who destroyed my life and now, after all that, when he grew tired of Lila and their daughter, is living with someone else. Lila knew this. She knew what my brother was like, yet she still chose to betray me with him. So, I don't feel sorry for her. It's like being told something is hot, but you still decide to touch it, you're going to get burned. After finding out where he was, I sent the location to Lila. I didn't want to get involved in their drama any further, but I also didn't want to abandon a child who wasn't at fault for having two idiots as parents. So, I gave one final piece of advice: you need to hire a lawyer and file for divorce and child support. Do it now, before Mason disappears somewhere else. Lila thanked me, and I could hear the relief in her voice. She apologized again, as she had done so many times before, but I was no longer interested in hearing it. I'm done. I sent a text: don't contact me again, don't show up at my door. This is the last thing I'll do for you. Whatever we had, whatever it was, ended a long time ago. I just wanted you to stop disturbing my peace forever. Update 4. To explain this update, I need to give some context about my brother. My brother never finished college, and since dropping out, he has been surviving on temporary jobs. That's why he was taking the landscaping course. He wanted to get work in that field. But the kinds of jobs he usually gets allow him to never stay tied down anywhere. And if you've read my previous updates, you know where I'm going with this. Yes, my brother moved, or rather, ran away. He knew Lila was trying to find him to sue for child support, so the first thing he did was flee his ex-girlfriend's house. That's what Lila discovered when she went to his ex's place to talk to him, but he was already gone. The ex said he had moved and didn't know where he was. Whether that's true or a lie, no one knows now. Meanwhile, I found out about all of this because Lila emailed me, telling me about the situation and asking me to help her find him again. But I told her she had betrayed me again by not respecting my request not to contact me, so I wouldn't help her with anything. My father also betrayed me when he apologized on my mother's behalf after they showed up at my house. I won't bore you by recounting what they wanted, because you already know. But I told them to their faces that I wouldn't spend another dime of my money on that woman. I had already wasted enough on a wedding that never happened, and they thought that was okay. So, my mother said she could give me some money back if I would take responsibility for Lila and my niece. I replied that if she was willing to write a check right then, I might consider whether it was worth my time deciding whether to take Lila back. Which essentially meant I probably wouldn't, but she told me she needed the assurance that if she wrote the check, she would get results. I told her that would be a gamble on her part. She thought about it for a moment and wrote me a check for $5,000. That doesn't even cover a quarter of the wedding reception cost, but it was what she could manage. After that, I told them to leave because the check didn't include the right to show up at my house. So, they left pretty quickly. I spent a few seconds thinking about whether it would be worth using my time to decide if I should take Lila back or not, and after a few long seconds of deep reflection, I came to the conclusion, no, it wouldn't. I took longer to deposit the check than I did to make the decision. The good news is the check cleared. I let my mother know over the phone, which she wasn't too happy about because, according to her, if I accepted the money, I should at least have kept my promise. But even if I had signed a contract, the check was only for consideration, and worse, for thinking about whether I should consider it or not. I've already spent more time than necessary thinking about a matter I don't care about. Maybe if the check had been larger, I would have considered it for a few more seconds, but the decision would have been the same. Terrible idea on my mother's part to try to outsmart a betrayed lawyer. Update 5. My mother asked me to return the money, but I told her to sue me if she thinks she has any legal grounds to do so. There's not even a text message as proof, and even if she recorded our conversation when I called to say I wouldn't help her, there was no mention of me agreeing to take Lila back for money. It would make for an interesting case in court, not to mention the possibility of a countersuit on my part. My brother finally resurfaced, and Lila served him the papers. And guess who he wants to represent him? Good luck finding someone who will do it for free, because I won't, and he doesn't have any money. And good luck to Lila trying to get anything out of my brother. If she wanted financial security, she shouldn't have chosen a loser, at the very least.
Reddit Relics comment. This kind of story makes me reflect on how loyalty and respect among family members are sometimes tested in ways we never imagine. Betrayal and impulsive decisions can destroy relationships in ways that are difficult to mend. In the end, it's important to realize that everyone is responsible for their own choices, and the easy solutions we hope for don't always bring the peace we seek. I think the biggest lesson here is understanding the need to maintain healthy boundaries and learning to say no when necessary, especially when the situation has already crossed acceptable limits. What do you all think? Have you experienced something similar in your own families? Did you like this story? Then hit the like button to support the channel. If you're not subscribed yet, take a moment now to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. Oh, and there are 2 more amazing stories waiting right here on the screen for you. Pick one and continue with me. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.